Je vous demande d'accueillir très chaleureusement Monsieur Simon Becker. Simon, bonjour. Thank you. You presented last night Limbo. What was it important for you to make that movie, besides the pleasure of playing such a character? But was it important for you to play that movie that criticized the Australian system of justice about the Aboriginal people?
First of all, thank you for coming. It's really an honor to be here and to be able to talk to you all today, and thank you, Jean-Pierre. Yeah, look, I think a big part of doing that film for me, well, there was two big parts of doing that film for me, is obviously we have this, there's a thing in Australia that is a kind of a important subject at the moment in regards to first Australians, Indigenous Australians, Aboriginal people. And that is a notion of truth-telling. Because we're a colonised country, it's very important that there is truth about the atrocities, atrocious acts against Indigenous Australians since colonisation. And the justice system does let Indigenous Australians down constantly, time and time again, even now. And yes, that is an important subject to be putting up onto the screen. I also think, you know, the beauty of cinema and a festival such as this is that it gives you a window to the world of other things that are going on around the world, and I think that's a really powerful aspect of cinema. You know, we do have the entertainment side of cinema, where we have people in capes and tights and prosthetic makeup and Marvel movies, but we also have cinema that is a representation of cultures and expanding people's view of different cultures around the world.
Mm-hmm. What is your feeling when you see the extract?
Oh boy, oh boy.
Well, I chose it because it's your first apparition in a Hollywood movie,
Yeah.
and at the same time, it could be a metaphor of your own stature at the time, your own place at the time, young actor coming in Hollywood. So maybe
Yeah.
there is.
Yeah, that's wild. So young. Oh, goodness.
What were your dreams at the time?
Oh, look, you know, that was my. I'd worked a bit in Australia. I'd worked in Australia for a few years, but I'd never done a film. So that was my first film, and yeah, I was like, whoa, this is crazy. Danny DeVito and Kevin Spacey, and no, it was fun. I had a great time, and Curtis Hanson was a wonderful director, and Dante Spinotti was the cinematographer. And I remember when that film came out, they had a premiere at the Grauman's Chinese on Hollywood Boulevard, and it was a very star-studded event. And you know, I had kind of guys like Gene Hackman coming up to me saying, "Kid, you were great, man," like after the film, and I thought, oh, this Hollywood thing is it's a walk in the park. I love this. You know, you assume that every movie's going to be met with that kind of warmth and love. There was a lot of learning to do after that. Yeah, that was good. That was actually the first meeting that I had with a casting woman in Hollywood was with the late great Mally Finn, who cast this film, and a lot of other great American films. And I walked in the door, and she said, "Here, I want you to read this script. And you know, maybe you can come back and meet the director tomorrow afternoon." And I went home. I bought the book on the way home, LA Confidential, the James Elroy book, and I read the script in the book that night, didn't sleep, and then went and met the director the next day. I was that enthusiastic. If I could just have a bit of that enthusiasm now, my agent would be a lot happier with me.
Did you have any models, any figure of actors that you like when you were a kid or a young boy or a young man?
Yeah, I think sort of around 1920, not 1920, but 19 or 20, I'm
You are
I'm
not so old.
I'm not that old, but I started. I moved to Sydney, and that was when there was a couple of smaller art house cinemas in Sydney, and that's when I started watching foreign films, and I fell in love with foreign films, and then I found myself at the Sydney Film Festival, which is a wonderful film festival if you ever get the chance to go down to Sydney. It's on in the winter, and I just sort of fell in love with foreign cinema. I became very fond of Jean-Paul Belmondo.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I thought he was fantastic to watch, so I kind of watched a lot of his films. Young Gérard Depardieu.
Depardieu?
And I kind of got a little caught up in Truffaut films for a while. And yeah, I liked watching those actors. That, you know, Jean-Paul Belmondo had a how do you say in French? It was like a joie de vivre.
Joie de vivre. Yeah.
Yeah, he had this sort of exuberance to him.
And he's very physical too.
Very physical, and I've always been very physical too. So I related to that.
Mm-hmm. And American actors? Not so much.
Some of them, some of them I
you don't have to. Huh?
No, but there were. I'm trying to think. Like obviously, De Niro and those guys were always, great and interesting. I'm also trying to think who else. Christopher Walken I thought was fantastic in a lot of the earlier stuff. Yeah.
What did you like in that story, and why did you decide to make your first movie by this story and to play in it?
I'm a little bit emotional, actually. It was how I grew up.
Yes, and you were surfing yourself.
Yeah, I mean the surfing, yes, of course, but the obstacles of fear and self-doubt. Mm-hmm. And identity. Mm-hmm. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Everything was wrong.
I'm an emotional person, and that's sort of really why I wanted to be a director, because films have made me feel something. And help me understand who I am sometimes, or help me understand what I'm feeling. And I think that film, well, it's based on a book, but the book was so true to the way I grew up. And I remember when I was about 14, 15, and these people existed in my life. A big part of my life was, and a big part of my finding my identity and excuse me, strength was through surfing. And I struggled with fear, and just that scene then of the kid, of the boy, Pikelet, his name is, that doesn't paddle out, and that rejection, of that feeling of being an outsider, all of those sort of emotional feelings, I felt at different times as a kid, and I think a lot of people go through that. And particularly in Australia, we had this sort of male archetype, this sort of bravery, and the obvious version of that story is that he goes out there and he slays the dragon and he's the victor, and that's the hero's journey. But within this story, the bravest thing that he does is he is he stands on his own 2 feet and says, I don't, later on in the movie, maybe go watch it, but he says, I don't like it. It's not for me. And I know a lot of kids when I was growing up that didn't have the courage to say that, and they put themselves into very dangerous, traumatic situations because of that, or they felt a need to have to be macho in some way, or live up to an archetype, an Australian archetype, male archetype. So I was trying to sort of subvert that, but also kind of, in a way, honour my own personal sensitivity. Yeah. But I think, any other subsequent films that I make, they're always going to be laced with the idea of identity and how you're perceived by the world and how you perceive yourself. And sometimes that there can be a real difference between those things. They often say that a lot of the great directors just make the same film over and over again. It's like, I remember hearing that once and I went, yeah, I can understand why, because there's something that drives people to make films, and often it's something that's deep inside them.
Years ago, that will be the last question because time is running. Years ago, the French daily Libération asked the same question to every director of the world. The question is very simple. It's, why do you film? If I ask you and say, why do you act, and why do you do movies, what would be your answer? So French.
Pardon. I can tell you why I film.
Yeah.
Why I film, and I still take photographs, and I still shoot film, and I like, because all of those things that I just talked about in some rambling diatribe, right, stream of consciousness, when you pick your camera up and you put it to your eye, it frames something, and that framing is a focus, and it puts a focus on there. And then within that, you actually have the focus of the camera, and you decide that we want to focus on this person, or we want to focus deeper. So that it narrows it down, and that, when I put a camera to my eye and I see that world like that, it comes alive, and that's exciting to me. Still, every time not so much with my iPhone, but when I put a camera to my eye and I look through a lens, the world is beautiful because it's so full of promise. What do I act? I act because the freedom that I once possessed as a child comes to life again.
That's a good answer. Thank you very much, Simon. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. Thanks, mate.
Thank you very much. It was really, thank you.